Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, yWhales, wherever you are. So again, really cool sessions that we've been having and so many really in-depth conversations with leaders in and outside Web3. Today we have Mr. Andrew Yang, and I think it's a very interesting topics that we're going to be discussing because he's obviously been in the space for a little bit and is now launching quite a few projects. So today I have with me Mr. Stefan Goss and Mr. Fred Thiel. So I thank my co-hosts today. But Andrew, let's jump right into it and let's kind of take a few steps back and kind of talk about your first exposures into blockchain cryptocurrencies and the technology around it and kind of everything that led you to being on the show today. And then we'll dive into your current projects, if that sounds okay.
Oh, I want to go back further still, Jay, because there was a moment in time when a friend of mine invited me to join YPO, and I qualified because my firm had reached that level and I was the CEO, et cetera, et cetera. So this close. But then I turned around and sold that company to a public company. And then I'm not sure if I qualified anymore because then I was the head of a division of a big company. And then I took this massive left turn to start and found a nonprofit. And I think that stuff definitely doesn't qualify for YPO.
You know what? I have to tell you, with your clout around the industry, we've got some exception waivers. I think that we could dust off and figure out a way if you're really that interested.
Well, thank you. And so this was in my 30s. My company was acquired when I was 34. And then I did something that I think a lot of listeners can relate to, which was, I decided to try and have a positive impact. And so for me, you'll all love this. The problem I tried to address was that there weren't enough entrepreneurs in the world. And at the time, I thought that we were producing too many bankers, consultants, and lawyers and not enough builders and job creators. And so I thought, well, how do you solve that? And I saw these recruitment pipelines that the professional services firms had developed into college campuses and said, we need that for startups in places like St. Louis, Detroit, New Orleans, Cleveland, Baltimore, et cetera. So I started Venture for America. It was patterned after Teach for America with a goal of recruiting and training thousands and thousands of enterprising recent college graduates to become the next generation of builder. So I spent 6 years doing that. And then after I realized that those problems were unfortunately continuing to get worse in different parts of the country. This is about when you would have heard of me, is when I showed up on your TV screen as a presidential candidate and you were like, what? Like that's different. I
always love seeing people with business ideals and experience, up on that stage. And so, again, as I do my best to stay apolitical on these things, I have to say, I really did enjoy hearing you speak. You actually came from a space of experience while you're on that stage. And clearly, the insanity level for you to put yourself through that is something I would never do. So congratulations for jumping down that pipe.
Oh, well, I just want to dig into this for a moment, too, because I think your listeners might enjoy it. So let's say that you decided to run for president of the United States and you were that crazy. So this was what I was facing in 2017. It turns out that there are only 2 rules to run for president. 1, natural born citizen, and 2, 35 years of age or older. So I think most people here listening or hosting, you could run for president. And when I addressed a YPO chapter, I said to them, I actually would trust any one of the people in this room to be president of the United States more so than than various major politicians, because you all run organizations and you have to be rational and measurement oriented and the rest of it. Whereas if you traffic in politics, you don't need to be any of those things. You can just be political. So if you were to approach running for president as a startup, which I did, then you think, okay, what do I need to do? I need to get 40,000 Iowans to select me number 1 on February 3rd, 2020. And then if you frame it in those terms, then it's like, well, that seems doable. Like I can get 40,000 Iowans.
Yeah. They got, clearly their choices were limited to begin with. So.
That was my thinking, Jay. I ended up getting 8,914. So I got 24% of the goal. But, it was a wonderful journey.
Yeah, and so on that, and before we start talking about crypto, what was it like dealing with the media? Because clearly it was not a unbiased media. And did you find, from an entrepreneur standpoint, that you were treated fairly, or did you feel that was kind of the deck was a little stacked before you walked in the door?
Oh wow! Let's just say the media was not welcoming the random Asian guy who wanted to give everyone money with open arms. I did write some of these war stories up in my book that came out a few months ago, Forward. But it was a startup, so declare for the presidency, raise some angel money, which is my friends and not really family, but just called my network and was like, "Hey guys, running for president, send me $2,700." You've all gotten those calls. I mean, maybe not for president. And so then when you get those calls, you're like, well, I guess I have to say yes because you're my friend, and like I'm not going to be a dick about it. So, you raise a couple $100,000 that way, and then you try and find product market fit. So, to your question, Jay, how do you find product market fit? You want to get media and energy and attention. Who will interview you? Turns out that most of the major networks will have nothing to do with you. So, how do you gain traction? Podcasts. So, for me, the single biggest uh, attractor of energy was podcasts. The first big one for me was Sam Harris. After he interviewed me, then all of a sudden we developed this organic following. The campaign really took off when Joe Rogan had me on his podcast, and that ended up getting, I don't know, maybe like 10, 11 million views. And so we raised $40 million, spent 7.4 of it on TV ads in Iowa to try and get those 40,000 votes. So again, it's a story that would be more familiar to many of your listeners than you might think. I'm kind of tacitly encouraging some of you to embark on this journey because when you look at the folks who are actually in office, you're more competent and capable than the vast majority of them.
I love that thought is, and you just met me, and I'd like to go ahead and counter that claim that I'm in any way responsible enough to be holding the nuclear weapon codes. But let's jump into, and I've got a dozen questions that we're going to have around that concept in a minute. But when did crypto and when did the idea of a auditable blockchain and everything that we're doing now with Web3, when did that kind of first come into your purview? And as someone that you probably didn't have major political aspirations back then, but clearly you have a good mind for government and oversights. What was that experience like?
I first heard about Bitcoin, I want to say maybe um, 2015, 2016, somewhere in that zone. I was running Venture for America. And so, I didn't have that much bandwidth to dig into it. But some of my more tech savvy friends went down the rabbit hole and reported back to me and said, "Hey, this is actually really
Yeah.
interesting." And I really became much more aware of crypto when I was running for president in 2018. One of the first communities to get behind me was the crypto community. I spoke at Consensus and Blockchain for Good and these other conferences, and there are all these people that were super pumped about my campaign at a time when no one was pumped about my campaign. So I was like, "Well, what's going on here? Like, why are they so excited?" And it was because they had this sense of optimism and abundance and possibility. And so, if you had a presidential candidate who was thinking big about ways that we can provide economic resources to people or paths forward for people, they also completely understood what I was talking about when I was arguing that AI was going to transform a lot of the labor market, that you were going to need to have different paths for people moving forward.
Interesting. And you were, and are you still are a proponent of universal basic income?
I am more convinced than ever that we are pushing more and more people to the side, and that we're going to need to be much more creative about how people get buying power into their hands, but more importantly, how we reconstitute the sense of structure, purpose, fulfillment, and community that most people get from jobs and their other relationships.
Interesting. And you used a word I love, community. Because to me, I believe everything in Web3 is related to communities. It no longer is a regional thing. It's no longer a local thing. It's now a global. You can have global communities, and so it really does kind of go past the traditional sense of what we would think. And you've got two big projects going on right now. Do you mind sharing a little bit of what you're working on today?
So I think you're referring to Lobby3 and GoldenDAO, or Lobby3 DAO, since it's also a DAO, though some of it's happening behind the scenes. So uh, people who are listening are probably aware about the fact that DC has discovered crypto, and that discovery is leading folks to want to issue new rules and regulations designed to mitigate various risks associated with these technologies. And friends of mine were very concerned that folks in DC didn't necessarily have a firm understanding of the space. The average U.S. senator is 63 years old. Average member of Congress is 57. So the leadership is significantly older than those numbers. The predominant emotion in response to crypto is confusion laced with skepticism. And so when I saw the situation, and I've spent the last couple of years following the guidance of the Onion, where the Onion wrote an article in 2011 saying the American people should hire our own lobbyist on Capitol Hill, so that we can be taken seriously. So I actually went and did that a couple of years ago and hired a bunch of lobbyists to lobby for uh, measures that I thought would improve the human condition. And so I now have a read on how to get things done in DC. And so I saw, well, wow, we should try and make sure that folks in DC understand Web3 tools and technologies, and that they don't go too far on trying to manage the risk and push all of the innovation and energy to other parts of the world. So we created the Lobby3 DAO to build a thriving community of people who want to help make this positive case to regulators in DC, and we're super amped about it. I just had a call this morning with some of our colleagues in DC. And I'm happy to say, so this is a mission critical situation. Like, buried in the Biden executive orders was a timeline. He said, "Hey, I want these rules in the next 210 days." Which is 7 months. So they want it done before the Democrats lose power in November. I mean, that's what the math is. So if you have 7 months, the rules are going to get issued for comment well before then. So you're looking at something like maybe 3-4 months. And so we don't have any time to waste. So that's what Lobby3 DAO is meant to address.
Very cool. So, and again, another thesis of ours, besides the communities will run the world, is that desperately we're in need of education, educational resources and lobbyists, and that's something that Fred and I talk about constantly on our weekly firesides. How are you approaching, and how are you finding people that are able to educate? Because it's not always the political. Representatives, it's usually their staffers that need to be
That's true.
educated so they can monitor. So how are you? What's your plans or your thoughts around education?
So we're just going to go straight to the folks we're trying to get to. To your point, Jay, if you invite members of Congress, you're more likely to get a hold of their staffers. And so if you can educate staffers, that's a great place to start. So we're legitimately looking at offering like blockchain primers for congressional staffers, and then have them be able to talk to their bosses about what the heck they've learned. The climate does seem like it's heading in a positive direction, where Democratic members of Congress actually recently met with leaders, and I think, Fred, you were a fly on the wall for some of these sessions. But there's an openness among a critical mass of Democratic legislators to be educated, and so we're going to be bringing resources to them in their offices directly.
Where's the climate more friendly, on the Democratic side or the Republican side? Like, like if you're saying just pure blockchain, like if I'm pro blockchain, like where do I fall on the spectrum suddenly?
Well, what you want to do, Stefan, is avoid being politicized one way or another. Because the fact is, if someone comes out and says like, "Oh, blockchain's the greatest," you're very likely to have someone on the opposite side being like, "Oh, I guess now I hate blockchain." That's
Fair
just the
enough.
way. That's like the way the American political system works nowadays. So you want to try and change the dynamics, make it so that you have supporters who are like Noah's Ark, where it's if you have one on one side, then you have one on the other side, like continuously try to pair them. I would say natively Republicans are a bit more open to it because they're more dubious of government regulation generally. And so that like if they look up and say, "Oh, new technologies," they're like, "Oh, we should make sure that innovators have a chance to do their work." And Democrats have been natively more dubious and skeptical, in part because Democrats have a little bit more of an establishment mindset and orientation, that they're a little bit more, I'd say, like comfortable with bureaucracy. I guess would be one way to put it. And so, to the extent that there's a side that I think we need to be educating, it would be a bit more on the Democratic side.
Yeah, it's interesting. You look at the demographics, and in the White House executive order, 16% of Americans own or hold crypto. The majority of those are under 35 years of age. You look at India, 700 million people are interested and view crypto as better than gold. And for Indians, that's a huge mind shift because gold for them for centuries.
They love gold, yeah.
Right. So you're seeing this demographic shift where clearly voters and the most active kind of voters are the younger voters. They're getting more and more active. They've learned to use their rostrum of podcasts and Reddit and all these other memes and methods to get their voice out there. And it seems that, if you think about 16% of American citizens, if that translates to voters within the next 5 years, you'd assume there's going to be a fairly wholesale shift in Congress of people who are pro crypto. And the question is, it's back to the education issue. You saw that interview with Elizabeth Warren, or the committee hearing with Elizabeth Warren regarding crypto, and she literally got a lesson on crypto, and she clearly had assumptions that typical for old school politicians, especially on the Democratic side, fight for the little guy. It's like, go after that Bitcoin miner in upstate New York who's making too much noise and taking renewable energy away from the community. Young people are shifting their attitudes. They're still progressive. They're still fairly liberal, at least socially liberal. But they're also fiscally conservative, which is really interesting. And this is this potential for a moderating force in the voter community. What do you think about that?
I think that the crypto community has the potential to become this very potent political force. To your point, Fred, right now it's not, because a lot of these folks are natively somewhat apolitical or non-political. The community doesn't, for example, pile into congressional races in any real way. As an example, if you do want to get behind various pro crypto candidates, like I'm a fan of that move. I think that politicians are subject to incentives, and then if they think that there's a cost to coming out and being very against crypto, like let's say Brad Sherman, who's a Democratic rep in California, who, by the way, has like many financial institutions as his donors, and like at least some of them seem anti-crypto. They're credit union types, and he has an upstart opponent named Erica Rhodes who's pro-crypto. So hint, hint. If you feel like getting behind Erica Rhodes, like have at it. But this is not a set of activities that the Web3 world has been playing in. The Web3 world hasn't been lobbying Congress at the same levels as others. That is quickly changing. But even now, as firms are coming together in DC, they're often taking relatively firm specific stances because they each have distinct profiles and issues and a point of view. So one of the quotes that I enjoyed was like someone from a very traditional industry who said, when our guys win, things are really good for us. And when they don't win, things are still pretty good. That's kind of the place you want to get to where you're normalized. And right now, Fred, like DC is still trying to make up its mind about where crypto falls. The pitfall is that one side loves and the other side hates it, because then you end up getting whipsawed.
But you've also got this concept now that's being floated with what's happened in the Ukraine and how crypto really, the Ukrainian government, $100 million plus in crypto donations, full fluidity and liquidity. They were able to receive it, they were able to spend it, invest it in the things that they needed, which would have been much more difficult using the traditional banking system. And oh, by the way, $100 million of transaction volume on the Bitcoin and other blockchains you would expect would have a huge impact on price. It hasn't. And look at the price today. We're moving up quite strongly in the marketplace. So I think all of a sudden the topic of Bitcoin as a national security issue is coming up. You have the Saudis wanting to quote effectively oil in yuan to the Chinese. This is the end of the petrodollar, which some people would argue died in 2008. But you're now starting to see the weaponization of financial assets. This should drive, one would think, a greater perspective from regulators that, hey, Bitcoin and crypto is of the national security interest. It was mentioned in the White House executive order that way. And this really is something that I think is going to come much more into the limelight, if you would, the importance of supporting and defending this nascent industry because it's so relevant. And, it's an impartial currency as a reserve currency for international settlement, which any other national currency or fiat currency could not be.
That's certainly one perspective and narrative. I mean, I think a lot of people are familiar with the other one, which is, these tools are going to be used to evade sanctions, for oligarchs to funnel resources in different directions. Now both of these narratives can have merit. I mean, Ukrainians are definitely receiving millions of dollars of relief via crypto. Which of those narratives am I seeing more in the press? I'd say I'm probably seeing more of the money laundering, like evasion narrative. And so it's one reason why I think there's work to be done. I think that the traditional press is reflexively quite negative on crypto.
Mm-hmm.
And why is that? I think it's because there are traditional interest groups that want them to be negative. I think most journalists are somewhat negative because they sense that there's this activity going on that they're not a part of, frankly, a lot of the time.
FOMO.
If you have Web3 journalists, they're like very, very positive. I mean, it's obviously a bit of a different audience. So it's the challenge to me is trying to balance the negative narratives with something a bit more holistic and in many cases accurate.
In any way, do you believe that the government today, the U.S. government, is capable of creating their own blockchain cryptocurrency, which I forget the entire regulations around it, but do you think that they're able to deploy an auditable chain that would be usable on blockchain technology as it sits today?
Right now, I don't think that they have that capacity. The executive order did include the fact that they want to explore U.S. digital currency, which I think is very, very achievable. Like, I don't think they would necessarily have it on the blockchain. Now, can they develop that capacity pretty quickly? You would think so, because there are dozens of other countries that are heading in this direction. So I do think we're going to see a digital dollar.
Hey, yeah, actually, I'll ask on to that. So I think, one of the interesting questions to me too is if BTC or crypto in general, I guess, actually ends up taking over, like what are the long-term consequences for the US, obviously, right? Because if the dollar suddenly starts weakening as the currency, right? I mean, I'm both a huge crypto as well as a huge US fan. Like how much does that actually hurt the US?
Well, this is the multi-trillion-dollar question, isn't it? You know, where, I mean, like the case that we should be making is, look, we live in a country right now where the vast majority of people's financial lives is being conducted via the U.S. dollar, and then millions or even tens of millions of people are using cryptocurrencies for various purposes, and this is the version of the future that we should want. You know, like the danger is saying that there is like a, you know, in either or a substitution. It's like, oh, if you have one you can't have the other. And there are people within Treasury, and to some extent the SEC, who do see cryptocurrencies as a potential threat to the dollar. And so then if your job is essentially like, I'm a guardian of the financial system and like the, you know, the dollar is my jam, then you wind up with like a very, very negative stance. And so you have to try and frame them as complementary, which I believe they are, because that's really the world we're living in now.
So when you think about the, one of the challenges for the U.S. government is, having the dollar as a reserve currency is very expensive for the country. So one of the challenges, I think, is, at least Bitcoin is impartial. It's decentralized. It's not controlled by anybody. If you started driving international trade around settlement in Bitcoin, it has much less of a downward dragging effect on the dollar than the euro or the yuan or some other reserve currency. Because I think part of the challenge is, it's one thing is trade, the other thing is reserves, right? We've weaponized financial assets. We have taught countries that their sovereign assets, if they are denoted in the fiat currency of another country, they are not theirs and under their control. They're under control of whoever issues that fiat currency. So I think we've hit kind of a watershed moment. It'll be interesting to see how it develops. One question back to kind of your initiatives. Why choose the format of a DAO for both of your initiatives versus a traditional model?
Well, if you're going to make a case for Web3 technologies as being able to solve some of the biggest problems, what better way to do so than via a DAO, which I think can provide something of a model for governance. Like if you have a collective that can decide how to invest its resources, and equally importantly, its own time and energy, then good ideas rise to the top, and people who put a lot of time in will end up having others over time be like, yeah, you're more attentive to it than I am. Like I'll defer to you on this, which could end up being a model for liquid democracy in the future, where we award other people, our vote on certain issues because we're like, look, like you're going to be the expert on this, and you can have something much more dynamic and responsive. So it was very natural to use a DAO for both Lobby3, and the other project is GoldenDAO, which is an API empowerment and community DAO that I'm excited about. I'm one of the most visible Asian Americans in the country now, which has been an adjustment because I was an anonymous entrepreneur several years ago. And there have been a lot of people who've been pained by acts of bias and even violence. I live in New York City, and there have been a number of Asians who've been killed based, at least in part, on their race. And so that's the other project that I'm working on. And there again, a DAO is very natural, because if you wanted people to have an investment in and control over the direction of the collective, much better to have that as your initial structure than something more traditional.
And are you finding any governance challenges with that as you look at, in theory, the DAO, the original intent of the DAO if the members who are contributing all of a sudden decide to shift the focus, its initial focus may get a little bit lost or distracted. Is that a risk or an issue in your mind, or is that just part of the process?
Well, it's early days, so we haven't run into that yet, Fred. But it could be an issue. We'll have to see. You have to believe in the community, so it's theirs. Now I will say, in the case of Lobby3, we do have some traditional lobbying activities that are being done that are not. It would be highly, highly impractical to have like a DAO control your your
We've seen what the
lobbying
Doge crowd can
activities.
do with voting power.
Yeah, so we're doing like the old fashioned stuff. We call it the inside outside game, where the DAO is going to be hopefully coming up with innovative ways to improve the media environment or the political environment. For GoldenDAO, it's really going to be up to the community how they want to invest time and resources, and that seems wholly appropriate to me.
Andrew, where do you feel the U.S. is in terms of adopting blockchain cryptocurrency technology compared to the rest of the world? And I say that with all I do is interview Web3 founders and projects all day long, and I know a number of them that are U.S. based that are currently planning on leaving the U.S.
Super sad, super disheartening. I'm with
Which is
Stefan,
a
where
horrifying thing.
yeah.
Yeah.
I'm pro Web3 and pro US. I'm not going to like front about that. And to your point, Jay, I know founders too who are building and building, and you know what they're butting up against? The limitations of regulation.
Yeah.
Or maybe they get some letter from the SEC and then they're like, okay, how do I fix this? And the SEC never gets back to them, and they're like, what the hell am I doing? Like, if you're an operator, you need to have some visibility into your risks and investment. I talked to another major Web3 leader who says that he goes to his lawyers, and he has a lot of expensive ones, and it's like, okay, like what can I do in this space? And then the lawyers are like, look, I can't tell you what you can and can't do in this space. Like, it's up to you and your risk tolerance, and here are like some of the choices you can make. And then the CEO's like, what the hell?
Yeah. And as experienced business leaders, like, look, we're used to like making business decisions and calculating risks. But I mean, every time I run into a high profile US based, crypto lawyer, like they get really excited. They're like, yeah, technically that's not, kosher, but we'd be thrilled to go fight that case against the SEC for you. I'm like, no, we're not going to play
Jay,
that
this
game.
is really this is the thing that we should all be pissed off about. So let's say that you think there is a 40% chance that the U.S. government does something stupid vis-a-vis crypto, which I'm going to suggest is probably about right. And let's suggest that if they do something stupid, that it's going to diminish enterprise values by maybe the same amount, maybe like 40%. So you're looking at something like 15 to 20% discount on the entire space because of regulatory uncertainty. And I'm going to suggest that's somewhat conservative. Because if you have a founder and they're looking at this situation, they're like, why don't I just go someplace else? And then I can deal with this much, much less. So it's not even numerical. It's binary in some cases, where you'd be like, am I going to stick around and like wait for them to figure this out? So whatever they come up with, if it's clear and you can navigate it, maybe you have to, like take some steps and spend some money and do some things. If you can clear up that overhang, then all of a sudden the entire space has the opportunity to grow tremendously. Because then you get rid of that 15 to 20% effective uncertainty discount. But you can also mainstream adoption, because a lot of folks will look at this and say, hey, instead of the wild, wild west, like now, like, there are some rules and there are some regulators and there's some people, and now it's normalized. So the value opportunity is immense, enormous, maybe even unimaginable. I mean, that's why I started Lobby3, is because I want to help try and keep that value here.
No,
yeah, I think one of the ironic things too is it's like I can't recall anything good that they've done. Right? It's not like I'm like, oh my god, yeah, they caught those scammers. Like, thank God. Right? Like, there's very few like, oh no, that regulation was smart. Right? Like, yes, we should make that illegal because that's sketchy. Like, all the super sketchy stuff is completely getting a pass, and then all the legit projects that should in fact get a pass then get in trouble, right? It's like, it just feels like they're,
if they can
purposely
find
just
you to
doing
send you a letter, you're probably like pretty legit.
That's right. It's like, wait, why are we going after the ones that are legit but doing nothing about the stuff that clearly isn't? And there's so much. I mean, there's so much in the space where you're like, wait, why is that allowed? And so it just feels like they're just going the totally wrong direction. It's not even that they're doing good stuff. It's just all the stuff they're doing is bad, and they're doing none of the good stuff that should be done. It seems real weird.
Yeah, no, there are a lot of people that share your frustration, Stefan, and it's one reason why I think this next 6-7 months is so mission critical, because I do think that like there's some measure of regulation that you should expect, but you just have to get clarity, and then try and have it so that that regulation is actually directed at some of the bad stuff, as you're saying.
So are they purposely inept, or are they like is their whole strategy just do bad like stuff that like hurts the space, and they know it's hurting the space and that's why they're doing it? Or do you think they're actually like trying to help and just like don't understand enough to actually be able to help?
Well, so this is something I want to go back to in like a bigger picture, is that you all run organizations, and there are a number of things that your organizations assume. So you assume that there's some relationship between performance and the organization's success, and that's not as true at the government level, where like they can do something onerous or ham-handed, and nothing really happens. And if there's a balance to be struck between managing risk and helping facilitate innovation and growth and the rest of it, they're much more likely to focus on the risk management part, because those are the things that they can quote, like, be called to task for. It's like, if an industry grows more, does anyone like in these offices get like a pat in the back, be like, hey, nice job, you facilitated job growth and the rest of it? Like, no, like that. That's not, that they'll be called to task more. It's like, oh, like, it's the Wild West, and like these people got scammed, and there was a negative headline. Like that's the way that unfortunately their incentives run.
So Andrew, I want to pivot over and talk about the foundation of blockchain, which is the mining or nodes and validations, which Fred is the expert in the room on. Where do you fall, or where do you see regulation going on the core foundation of this technology, which is right now Bitcoin is proof of work. We're seeing Ethereum trying to move to proof of stake, and it's taken a lot longer, and we'll see if they're successful. Do you feel like it's even a battle that's fightable, to help them understand the difference between these, and why it's relevant to let it be? Or what's your thoughts?
Well, I think we do have to try and educate them as to what the difference is, what the value propositions are. There's also the truth of it that, if there are regulations here in the U.S., like, you are going to push activities to other parts of the world, and like, maybe that doesn't actually solve the root problem you're trying to solve. If it's, for example, energy consumption and sustainability. This is, though, one of the bludgeons that people utilize, and we should be very aware of it. And I will say, on a personal level, like, if there was a way for Bitcoin to be mined that was much less energy consuming, like, I would be all over it, and I'm sure like most people here would be too, because having something be very energy intensive this day and age, is something you'd love to have an alternative for.
But I think,
we do have Ethereum.
You do, but
Fred,
unfortunately, it's, I think you have to look at security and centralization. Vitalik has made this comment most recently that, yes, Ethereum is becoming highly centralized. If you look in the staking of Ethereum, it's basically 4 entities control most of the staking that really goes on there. So centralization doesn't solve the problem. You have governance issues. You have all sorts of issues with anything that's more centralized. I think the thing with Bitcoin is, and the argument with proof of work that people forget.
I understand the merits of it. Yeah. I do.
But on the energy side, I think the challenge is people think energy is finite. They look at Europe, who shut down nuclear and coal preemptively and are trying to rely on an interruptible load such as wind and hydro. And when those don't operate, you have to supplement with gas. In the US, we still have excess energy. The single biggest driver of renewable energy deployment right now amongst the large power companies is the opportunity for Bitcoin mining. So that's additional energy. It's not a limited resource. It's non-polluting because it's renewable. If you want a company to build out a gigawatt wind farm, you've got to have a market for them to sell it to. And right now, the interruptible load is sold at a loss because you still have lots of base load energy from nuclear, coal, and these other things. So if you want that transition to happen, you have to incentivize consumption of renewable energy. And proof of work is the ideal for that. And if proof of work does nothing more than just add additional renewable energy, which can, by the way, be made available to the grid in minutes when it's needed. And, Governor Abbott, Texas talks about this. The head of ERCOT in Texas this week came out and said, hey, thanks to Bitcoin mining, we're able to respond to grid issues very quickly. That's the education that has to happen. It's not energy being a zero-sum game and you're stealing energy from one person to give it to miners. It's a totally different reality.
Yeah, I know. It's a much more sophisticated dynamic.
Andrew, when and I want to jump back over to kind of one of your projects real quick, and Lobby3 or Lobby DAO keeps coming up. If we funded you, you're perfectly funded. You maxed out sales of your NFTs and you had anything and everything available to you. What would be your roadmap from now through the end of that 7 months that you would put into action to because talent is so scarce right now. So what can you do today to help bring these things to light?
So there are a number of things you can do very quickly that are traditional that are not being done right now. So at this point, maybe 85% of members of Congress don't have an official stance on any of these issues.
Wow.
And so that they're looking up and saying, well, like, where do we stand? The member of Congress doesn't have an opinion. So that they looked at their policy person and be like, hey, where do we stand on this? And then the policy person is like, let me get back to you. So then the policy person goes out into the world and is like, okay, where do we stand on this? And then if someone from industry comes and says, hey, here's where we want you to be, they'll be like, well, I can't really just take your word for it because, you're industry. So they're going to go to a group like the Bipartisan Policy Council or a think tank that's meant to be balanced and reasonable and say like, hey, like where is the reasonable place to land on this? And then right now, the Bipartisan Policy Council is also saying, "Let me get back to you." And so the thing you have to do is is furnish some of these think tanks with the appropriate resources so that they can say like, "Here's a reasonable place to land." And then all of a sudden, this 85% of members that are looking for an opinion on this, a third of them will be like, well, like we think the Bipartisan Policy Council's like recommendations are like a fantastic starting point. So that's something we can make happen very pretty quickly and directly. We can go straight and educate members and their staff members. That can't be underestimated because right now, again, like most of them don't have an opinion, and I'm happy to say like the openness is there. The third thing that we should be doing, and this is something that it'd be my focus, is that there's like the case you can make. There's the education, but the single most powerful thing you can do is demonstrate that it's actually helping constituents, and then have folks in their community actually stand up and say, "Look, this stuff's good for us," and not us say it, like people that they represent, maybe even that they've known for years. And so my personal goal on this is to have various implementations in poor Black neighborhoods that right now are being exploited by check cashers and money lenders and the like, and say that, look, this is actually providing a different financial foundation and financial resources, and they're not being exploited. And then you have civic leaders stand up and say that this has actually been exactly what we've been looking for in our community. And then you can change the political climate, and you can do this in various communities around the country. Now we have to do that very quickly if we're going to make an impact in the next 6-7 months. But like the most powerful stories are the stories that other people tell about you. it's one reason why when you have a speech to give, they always try and find someone to introduce you. You know what I mean? Like there are things that like the Web3 community can do, but we need other people talking about us in positive ways to these decision makers.
So when we just spoke, kind of earlier, we talked about the youth that is coming into crypto Web3, and really, I have a 14-year-old son, and he doesn't even think about fiat currencies. Like him and his friends, they live on the blockchain, and that's how they're
They probably
exchanging.
think
And
in Robux, so they're like my kids.
no, he's a Solana guy. They're doing DeFi.
Oh wow, that's
They're
more
minting
advanced than mine.
NFTs, and so yeah, the youth and I talked to him a little bit about it, but to tell you the truth, they're all learning on their own. Where should we as a kind of an overall thesis for education? The rest of the world, we see India and China and a number of others starting to code. And they're not coding in Web 2 protocols. They're starting to learn coding in Web 3 protocols. Do you think that this is something that every high school, across America should at least be educating to some extent on? Or how do we, and if so, how do we make that happen from a lobbying perspective?
Well, yeah, it would be tremendous to try and get kids this exposure and set of skills. Uh, I know something about the investments in computer science curricula around the country. One of the single biggest problems they have is teachers. Like they have a really hard time staffing those classrooms. And so could folks provide resources that it's like a lot of your projects. The single biggest scarce resource is human capital and talent. So if you had people who had opportunities to like get into classrooms, that would be enormous. I mean, given who we are, you'd probably want to find some kind of virtual education means to try and broadly disseminate some of this training, especially because you're literally trying to teach them in Web3, just like your kids. So it would be that model would make a world of sense. But we all know that this can be a massive transformer for someone's career and their aspirations.
Do you believe in a universal global currency that Bitcoin or something that's going to come in the future can replace the U.S. dollar? And it's crazy talk right now for some of the people, but do you believe that the dollar is replaceable by an auditable coin on the blockchain?
I think cryptocurrencies are going to be an enormous part of the future, and if you project forward, like you can see them hopefully being a force that bring people together from across the globe. Yeah, so when you fast forward, that's what the future looks like.
Andrew, as we look here at what is kind of a tumultuous environment and all of the things going on in the world today, both internationally and in Washington, what are you concerned about? What's important to you? And what would you like our audience to be thinking about from your perspective?
Oh, thanks, Fred. So I wanted to share some of my early arc because I wanted people to feel like I could be you if you'd made very different choices over the last number of years. I ran a private company that became number one in the U.S. and was then bought by a public company. Started an entrepreneurship nonprofit that helped train, at this point, hundreds, maybe thousands of aspiring entrepreneurs. And then I decided to run for president because there are these massive problems that I realized that our government was going to need to play a role in solving. And it's one reason why Web3 is so awesome and powerful is that like it's being used to solve all kinds of problems. But one of the things that we do know is that there's a lot more energy and capital and resources going to solving market-based, market-driven problems that that you can raise money for. And then if you solve it, then you're going to make money and everyone's in good shape. And then there are these other non-market problems where you're like, oh man, what the heck is going on over there? And those non-market problems tend to be the purview of government, and government is kind of like antiquated and inefficient and not doing great stuff. So I ran for president. I hope people, when they saw me on stage, or when you all saw me on stage, are like, oh, this guy reminds me of people that I know or work with. Like, he's like, he's for the most part talking like a business person, which is, what I consider myself. And if you look at what's going on in the U.S., most of you think like, wow, like our political system has really gone berserk. Like, like that this doesn't seem to be going well. But when you dig in a little bit deeper, you find that our system is doing what it's designed to do. It's just really, really poorly designed. So, well, what do I mean by that? That we have a two-party system in the U.S. And it turns out that at this point, about 90% of our congressional races are gerrymandered to be non-competitive in the general. So it's going to be either very blue or very red. So if you're a member of Congress who wins, you have a re-election rate of about 94%. And the only way you're going to lose is if you get primaried from within your own party. So your incentives are then to try and placate and please the 10% most rabid partisans in your district to keep your job. So I want everyone to imagine what those incentives look like in practice. You're like, whoa, like these people are a little bit out there, but I guess I got to try and make them happy. So you have this bifurcated country, and then representatives who are rewarded for being in their corners and just blaming the other side. And if you do that, you keep your job. If you come together and compromise, you actually get pummeled and punished. And so then you wonder why it is that it's dysfunctional. It's actually rewarding people for being dysfunctional. And so if you were to want to fix this system, you'd want to try and get back to first principles. And the founders of the United States were very anti-partisan. Washington said, hey, parties are what we have to watch out for. John Adams called them a great evil. Madison famously warned about factions that don't change. And so we have to try and engineer a more modern, dynamic political system, which starts with just having more than two parties. Now, because you all are operators, and this is where it gets funny, is like you go straight to what's actually possible structural, and you're like, oh, like, it seems impossible to get away from the duopoly. But it turns out that there are a couple of weak spots in the system that can potentially get us closer pretty quickly. And the main weak spot in the system is that you can actually have ballot initiatives in 25 states. And I think there's one in Missouri on right now, Jay, that shifts that state to nonpartisan open primaries and something called ranked choice voting, where all of a sudden you can vote for anyone. There's no spoiler effect. You can't be bullied and say like, oh, you're going to like make the bad guys win. And so Alaska made this change in 2020, and it immediately had a different set of incentives for Senator Lisa Murkowski. There are other states, Missouri, Nevada, who have it on the ballot this year. And so if you make this change, then you can actually improve incentives. That's really the big message, is that people will respond to incentives. If you have terrible incentives, then behavior will become terrible. So we have to try and make the incentives reasonable again. And the best way to do that is through process changes. And so that's what I'm trying to do every day through the Forward Party, which is this third party I founded that is meant to be independent, reasonable, data-driven, centrist, and concentrated on reforming the mechanics of a system that are going to just make things crazier over time.
I love it. And you described everything that government is not. so clearly you're moving in the right direction on those fronts.
I'm like a like a could have been YPO member who happened to have the misfortune of trying to tackle really big non-market driven problems. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Last question before we kind of head into the final section, and that is really with everything you're seeing, nationally, internationally, and everything you kind of learned through that last election cycle, what would have solved for you any of the problems that you dealt with in the last Democratic race had you been part of this current new foundation that you're going with now? Would this believe I'm sorry. the way you just described voting, would that have solved the problems in this last election that so many people have complained about?
Oh yeah, because I just talked to a great guy who I think even might be a YPO member. He like entrepreneur, big private company, sold, runs for Congress, and he just had a miserable time in the primary because again, like if you try and go through the primary, then all of a sudden like people push you to take stances that don't match up with the vast majority of the constituents, but they do match up with the primary voters. And so if you just went straight to a race where anyone can vote for anybody with regardless of party affiliation, then all of a sudden you'd have much more reasonable candidates come out on top, and I dare say I might resemble that. Like I did not enjoy aspects of the Democratic primary. Let's put it that way.
Oh, I can only imagine, and it's kudos to you for putting yourself out there, because it's just crazy, the attacks, regardless of who you are and your background or
and
anything.
This is one of the things that's paralyzing people like you all and the people listening to this. Like a lot of your leaders, your patriots, you want to do something positive, but then you look at it and you're like, oh man, like I don't want to go into this freaking crazy mudslinging media environment where there's going to like pick apart some weird thing I said from 5 years ago and then attack my character. So like a friend of mine, Mark Cuban, by the way, I'm trying to get him to run for president. It's like, like he looks up at this too. And like that's one of the things that reasonable people want to avoid. It's like, because like if you're an effective operator and the rest of it, you're also rational, and you're like, wait a minute, if I head into this environment, are the characterizations going to be fair? And we can increasingly see that a lot of them are unfair.
Awesome. So what else? You're clearly in Web3. You're a Web3 entrepreneur now, so congratulations. What else are you seeing in and around the space that you think is just cool? You've got a couple DAO projects of your own. You're playing with NFTs a little bit as well. What's kind of got you inspired or got you moving that you've seen recently?
No, I'm someone who's excited about some of the efforts to make the space more accessible. I'm, for example, with one of the DAOs that we're starting, there are a lot of people that are interested, but then maybe the DAO is a different format for them. Maybe they're not Web3 natives, and so like I'm really excited about folks that are making it easier to participate. And this might be heresy to some people listening, but whatever. Like if you just like, have a credit card and you want in on like, your DAO project, and just like, cause like I was talking to a major comedian about doing something on Web3. And then he was like, hey, can my fans who don't know shit about crypto just like bust out a credit card? And if the answer is yes, then, that he's more likely to be like off to the races. And so that's something I want to push people on. Like I want to see Web3 impact people in the real world. I want to see Web3 be more open and accessible to folks who aren't quite as insidery. Those are the things I'm excited about.
Awesome, man. So you got a lot of projects. We've got let's see, Forward Party, and let's see, I got all these things. Lobby3, and then what was the other one?
GoldenDAO for galvanizing.
How can people reach you?
Well, they want to reach me. I'm on Twitter at Andrew Yang. I do engage there actively. Or you can just reach out, info@forwardparty.com. We are not that huge an organization, so believe it or not, that shit will get to me.
That's awesome. And congratulations that you haven't been kicked off Twitter yet. I think it's only a matter of time before they silence a loud voice. So
I've got some friends over there. I'll be like, hey guys, what are you doing?
Very, very cool. Andrew Yang, thank you so much. Fred Thiel, Stefan Goss, thank you guys for co-hosting today. And really, really amazing just to kind of talk about this. Again, we generally avoid politics, but with where everything is today, I think it's so relevant for us to have this talk and understand, what was it like as a political candidate to really come in and see a little bit behind the curtain. So we really applaud you for taking that effort, going through the pain and suffering to get there.
I did it,
and
so
then,
you don't have to, Jay.
yeah, no, clearly not qualified here, and nobody wants me to even run for
again. I would
candidacy.
put you guys ahead of our current crop of leaders. 10 times out of 10.
Awesome, love it. yWhales, we'll catch you guys next time.